Good morning, people of the internet. You're listening to Debi Radio 79.5 FM, a podcast where we discuss the movie Grosse Pointe Blank 1 minute at a time. I am Dev.
And I'm your other co-host Hugh, and on today's show, we are looking at minute 41, which is memorable for the phrase, 10 years, man!
10 years!
And joining us on today's show, we have John Strawn of the now retired Super-candid podcast, and hopefully an exciting new Movies by Minute podcast that I'm going to guilt him into having to make now. Welcome, John.
Yes. Send all the guilt. I need the motivation.
So yeah, as Hugh says, we've got Jeremy Piven yelling 10 years at us as John Cusack and Jeremy Piven are still cruising in Paul's car, and leading back to the high street so that Paul can drop Martin off.
Yes. This was, when I was thinking about it, might be the first time that I could recall seeing John Cusack and Jeremy Piven sharing a film together. I was thinking, and I couldn't think of an earlier example. There might have been a cameo or something, but have they been in a film prior to this together?
I'm pretty sure they have.
Funnily enough, we looked into this a while back, and I think they'd done some stuff together, but it'd been a while.
Oh, okay.
And they definitely worked together after this. But for most of us, you're right. I think for most people who are moviegoers, movie watchers, I think this was it. This is the moment. And this conversation, prior to this minute, Piven's character, Paul, has lit up a joint. And they're having this discussion. And one of the interesting things about this scene is that we've now switched. Because earlier, the camera was on Paul's side of the car. And it was very much seeing things from his way. And now we're on the other side. We're on Martin's side. And we definitely feel what's the emotion coming at Martin. And also, there's also the fact that this is where Martin is forced once again to have faced the question. Everyone wants to know, where have you been? What have you been doing? And it's absolutely fascinating because the chemistry between them, you really feel like Piven knows Cusack. You feel an off-camera chemistry, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So they were together in Say Anything and The Grifters. And specifically, I think The Grifters is where both of them have a fair amount of screen time. So it has been a while, but I personally feel that this character was written with Jeremy Piven in mind. When Cusack and his mates Steve Pink and Debi DeVincentis were rewriting the script, I think that there were a few casts that had particular characters in mind, or few characters that had particular cast in mind. This was one.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I don't recall where, probably in a cinema magazine or something, where I learned that Jeremy Piven and John Cusack were good friends. I feel like I've always known that they're best friends in real life, and I read that into any scene I see with them.
So, speaking of cinema magazines, how did you come to the film first? When did you first see this?
So, to the best of my recollection, I saw this film in theaters. It was one of my first John Cusack films that I saw in a theater.
Oh, wow.
I was a little too young for his John Hughes era. Those were films I was aware of, but I think I might have seen Pretty in Pink on home video, but I don't really recall seeing any of his earlier films. I know several of my friends were huge fans of Better Off Dead and spoke of it constantly, but to my great shame, to this day, I've never seen Better Off Dead at all. I maybe seen a few clips of it, but that's a big gap in my cinema knowledge there. So I saw this in the theaters. It's kind of my introduction to John Cusack as a leading man. Big fan, became a big fan, and I followed up, of course, I think the very next summer with seeing his magnum opus, Con Air.
That is not the film I was expecting to come after that phrase.
No, but it's deserved.
Is it?
Yes,
I don't know.
Con Air is there's so much love about Con Air, including the fact that it was written as a parody, and the writer sold it as a parody, and then had the great irony of watching it being turned into the very thing it was parodying without changing
played
the
completely
script.
straight.
Yeah, because he wrote it after Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead. And he was right. He was like, "What? He'd written some other scripts and nothing was getting made." And he was like, "What am I going to do?" And he's like, "I'll just write one of these. No one's going to, even if I just sell it and it doesn't get made." And then the next thing you know,
and speaking of that distinction between the way the written word on the page and how the actors bring to it, this scene, when I watched it, I was wondering, is this simply picking the alternate takes and playing them one after the other, because the dialogue is pretty much word for word from the previous minute to this minute, and you can see that there's a different energy, like as you mentioned, a different camera angle, and I thought, is this the most obvious bit in the film of piecing together those multiple performances into a single scene, and the fact that Piven is high makes it work because he's repeating himself.
I never actually thought of that, and as soon as you said it, I'm like, yes, that is absolutely what has happened. But I also think it really plays into that disbelief. Like, this is the first guy who's really starting to seriously consider the fact that this is actually what Martin does for a living. And this is like, he goes through that. Like, it's been 10 years. It's been 10 years, and Martin's just like trying to reinforce, like, no, really, that's what I went off and did.
Right, because Debbie just lets it go, with a bit of an eye roll of like, okay, if you don't want to tell me, don't tell me.
Exactly.
But he's very much, Piven is very much of a like, okay, but seriously, 10 years.
Well, the other thing with Debbie, as we'll see later on, is that the Martin she knows is a wiseacre who makes stories up just to just because but she's in on those. That's why she lets this go. Whereas, as you say, with Paul, it's obviously a different dynamic. They're bros, right? They they've hung out together. They've been the fact that he lights the fact that in the previous minute he actually lights the joint for him, like, it's so intimate as a gesture, like you're driving here, just here you go, and they don't discuss it. He doesn't ask it. It just just hands it over and it happens. So there's a male intimacy here that is unusual to some degree, but also, as you say, very different from the attitude Debbie and everyone else for that matter who keeps asking him, "Where have you been?" It's a very, very different take. But I also find it interesting how Martin explains it. Like, the dialogue allows Cusack to make it sound like a perfectly reasonable thing using like 80s corporate speak. Like, I was part of this big public sector institution, and then I had to go private.
Yes. It reminded me of American Psycho, where he tells people that he's into murders and executions, and mergers and acquisitions, of course.
Yeah, it's exactly that. And in fact, you know what? I think you might be the first guest we've had who's brought up American Psycho. Dev, am I right? I think so.
Yeah, I think so.
Because I've been thinking it. I haven't mentioned it. I keep forgetting it. It does feel like there's a nod to Ellis here. There's a certain Ellis. I mean, I know this is 2 years before Fight Club and everything and all the rest of it, but for Palahniuk and that mood of those sorts of films. But Ellis did all that stuff in the 80s really well.
Yes.
When Cusack was around and doing films, and it's like one of those things where there's a certain, there's some of that here. Like the way he dresses and that conversation he has with the rent-a-cop. And so I just realized that was very American Psycho.
Even grocers move to unionize and bring a business-like aspect to this.
Yeah, absolutely. It is fascinating to watch how this script has, the layers of social commentary that this isn't completely true. There was a time period where American cinema had a fair bit of social commentary anyway, but I am going to generalize, and I know film fans who will take exception with me, but I do feel that in the 90s in particular, we started to move away from explicit social commentary, particularly with the new wave of younger filmmakers and indie filmmakers wanting to just like, hey, is it cool? Okay, we do it. And actually, and it's the critics who start picking out what is and isn't commentary. We go back to a kind of era of we're going to entertain you, and then someone else will figure it out. As opposed to going in as a director going, we are going to do this. There's no more Norman Jewison, right? Much as I love him, there's nobody quite like that in the 90s. And this is possibly as close as we get. And I don't think it's Armitage's. I think this is coming entirely from Cusack, his buddies, the script.
And I think, what's the writer's name? Tom Jankovic?
Yes.
I think that a lot of this is coming from that.
Yes.
Very directly.
The original draft, yeah.
Yeah, I think, some of the tone is implied by the rewrites, but I think a lot of this is from that very first take on it.
Yes, and I think in the following minute, when we get back to Joan Cusack's character, even more of that business satire becomes prevalent.
Yeah,
I think thinking of the John Cusack and Jeremy Piven just cracking each other up as old friends. It's how I felt about at the end of their conversation when they both just start laughing. I felt like is this just a hair's breadth away from the blooper reel where they crack each other up and they break character because they're both of them laughing. It's so genuine. You can tell that they've both really been entertaining each other as they go back and forth in this discussion.
Very much so. Very much so. And the thing is, so one thing we've listeners will have heard us talk about on previous episodes is the editing process of the film. And funnily enough, everything you said, John, actually goes to the heart of that. We interviews with online that Armitage did many years ago make it quite clear that he cut down a much longer cut because he gave everybody the freedom. He shot minimum of 3 different versions of every scene to allow for some flexibility. And I think you are absolutely right that this conversation in the car shows us, as Dev said, possibly one of the most obvious examples of cutting it all together. But as you say, it works not least because of that last moment, which is so natural, so unforced that as you say, it's the guys, it's the 2 guys who know each other having a giggle, and whether or not it was meant to be there or not, it works so well.
Yes.
And the fact that the dialogue where that dialogue's heading at the end of the minute, when he drops Cusack off, is very much kind of, some of it's overdubbed and from a long shot, and you sort of think, I wonder if they'd just given up trying to get the actual dialogue done that day. It's like, we'll fix it in post. just a bit.
It's part of what I like about the I don't know if you want to call it the vibes of this film is Martin definitely feels like he's just hanging out. He's not going anywhere in particular. He didn't have he does actually have a job, but he's completely ignoring that and just hanging out, going around to visit all his old haunts. And it's just that afternoon of, he has nowhere that he needs to be. He's just going to wander around with Jeremy Piven for a while. And then after this, we'll see he kind of aimlessly goes back to the Altamart later in the week.
Yeah, it's the behavior of somebody who's kind of burnt out on their job, right? Like you've got something you should be doing and you're just procrastinating on it, like in a way that you never would normally, right? Like normally we've seen him, he's very on top of his work, he puts a lot of planning and prep into the hits that he takes out, and this one he's not even looked at it yet. He's just trying not to think about it and completely like disrupted by Debbie. And like, even at the end of this minute when he pulls out the rangefinder and he's, just scoping in on her at the end. He's definitely, like, I think facing something here that he's, we're gonna see.
So it makes me think about his conversation where when he starts off explaining himself, he says, "I freaked out and joined the army," and I don't think when I watched the film, I was trying to pay attention for it. Does he ever say what was he freaked out about? Like what freaked him out? Like, was it Debbie? Was he afraid of? Was he afraid of the corporate America path that he had in front of him? He's a Tyler Durden type who saw a vision of his future wearing a suit and selling things, and that's what freaked him out.
He was sat there in his goddamn rented tuxedo, and he realized for the first time in his life that he wanted to kill somebody.
Oh my god! I know you love this movie so much, but the fact that you just reel that off.
Yes.
Dude, don't tell me you're looking at the script. Are you looking at the script?
No.
Oh my god, dude! That was perfect.
That's a great pull.
Yeah, that's at the end when he's talking to Debbie and her dad in the bath.
Yeah. So that's as close as we get to an explanation as to what he was thinking when he had that realization he wanted to kill someone. I think probably there's all of us have to some extent that feeling when we reach the end of high school of like, well, we've got to start adulting now.
Yes.
And not wanting to. I think that's the moment of realization. But
yeah, and it ties in the progression of Cusack's career to some extent. He's played high schoolers for so long, and then he makes The Grifters, and then he starts moving into kind of dark comedies like this that have some similarities with the darker films that he made, but they're definitely he's playing against his type. I think of the films he made a few years after this where he's a more traditional romantic comedy, something like Serendipity, for example. And that seems like what you would expect John Cusack to do, based upon going from a teenage leading man to a young adult leading man. But those examples are very few and far between in his career. And as we see, as his career continues on, his choices in choosing films become more and more unusual, to be generous.
Yeah, I this is something that comes up every now and then. I do one. I mean, I'm sure he's probably addressed this somewhere in an interview, but I do get the impression it's been very much a question of, in a contract and being just saying, yep, okay, what am I doing this week? All right, let's just get it done because it's paying the bills. And then every now and then you spot something in his career and it's like, oh, he's there. That's the one that he wants to do. That's the interesting thing. And it flows back and forth. But I do wonder how much of this was because of these initial productions that were produced by him, that were his heart and soul, that were very much signature films. The Jack Ball, Grosse Pointe, High Fidelity, and I do wonder whether, for all their success, I do wonder if there was a changing of the guard in Hollywood, and a sense of maybe he wasn't able to get those sorts of films made anymore. I don't know. I think I hate to say this, but I feel like the fact that we've said in other episodes about him, his overt political stances on things. There is literally his film career before 9/11 and his film career afterwards. And I think he just was like, nobody wants to hear this anymore.
Yeah. And I think, his outspoken political opinions make him hard to palate in Hollywood, because you're either going to be upsetting the people you work with or the people that fund you. Like, there's no real good win there, right? No matter what you say. And that became increasingly the case, I think, over time.
Yes, I was looking at his post Grosse Pointe Blank career, and I was thinking, like, there was a time when a John Cusack movie was appointment cinema, and High Fidelity, as you mentioned, one of my favorite films of all time. I remember just being completely blown away when I saw that in the cinema, and I watched the DVD countless times, and possibly maybe one of the best pairings of actor, role, director ever. I can't. I enjoyed the High Fidelity television series, but it's not the same without John Cusack's particular energy. And then you see, after that.
No, go on.
Yes,
then everything offers,
Yeah. And that was, look at 2000, just before 9/11.
And then boom. And again, I also wonder if, I also wonder what casting directors made of him as well, because there's nobody really does what he does, right? His particular set of skills, to quote another film, to do with hitmen in action. And I think it's not that he was aging out of it, but there's a sort of thing of, I don't think people quite knew what to cast him in. And like there's all kinds of things I'd like to have seen him do, and I just don't know what happened. I don't know if it's things he wouldn't have done, or I'm just thinking of various films along the way, and I'm just sort of thinking, we kind of, as you say, it was appointment cinema, and it's not anymore, and that's a real shame, because he's still a great actor.
I think of it as, like, sometimes I've heard actors described as too good looking, and that being a detriment. And I wonder if John Cusack, he has the leading man looks, but the character actors, instincts. So I think of, could you replace Paul Giamatti in several films with John Cusack? And the only odd thing is, John Cusack is so handsome that the character would have to be completely reconsidered, because part of Paul Giamatti's acting is his unconventional appearance.
Yeah,
I am surprised he never. I'm not surprised. Maybe he just didn't want to. I'm surprised that in the era of prestige television, we didn't see him garnering a particular. You know what I mean?
So he had the terrible luck with his, I believe it was Utopia.
Yeah.
Was his Amazon Prime series?
Yep. The remake of the UK show. Yeah.
It's just the bad luck of a show about a pandemic being released in early 2020.
But I mean, but like, even, given his kind of, I don't know. I sometimes I think Christian Bale took a couple of things that maybe Cusack would have taken. Some of the stuff that Bale does with what is his name? Scott. I can't remember the name of the director. The guy he did Out of the Furnace with, and then did that Western, Hostiles. I feel like Cusack would have actually fit quite nicely into that role. But the thing about Bale is Bale's always willing to go the extra mile physically and hide the fact that he's a reasonably good-looking guy. He'll put under a beard, and he'll go lose some weight, and he'll say to the makeup guys, "Can I have a scar here?" or whatever. Whereas Cusack's Cusack. Cusack just is him, and he acts the role. But I also feel like it would be interesting to see him. It would have been interesting to see him have his Bourne identity, if you know what I mean.
Is that what we're watching right now?
I kind of feel like it is.
Well, that's what I mean.
I feel like
he
started this move towards a more action style, and then with High Fidelity, it kind of pulled back on that. And then Max afterwards is still like, nowhere near the action thing. And I think this was his opportunity to go that route, and it didn't manifest into anything.
Yes, maybe just 10 years, 10 years too early for Hollywood. Going the opposite direction. I think of this film, I think of it, there's some parallels with something like John Wick, in terms of some of the fights later. But as you said, like, it's both the tonal mix, and it's, the market at the time. This certainly was not a blockbuster hit. This wasn't burning down any records in the cinema.
No, but it was a big home video VHS one. And I think that's the key. I think that's the other thing, is recognizing that the market had changed, and what films were for. I mean, so much of what he worked on afterwards was straight to DVD, and barring stuff like Con Air. But I mean, once we hit that point of his career that we're discussing, so I do think it's also about recognizing where the market is and what things are. And he despite Con Air, he's never been the guy to pursue the big the big budget stuff, right? He's a guy who got had a career the old-fashioned way, where they made films and they became hits, and so he became big. As opposed to, here we are, we know we're putting together a big film. You want to be part of it.
I guess post Con Air, perhaps his biggest budget film is 2012, which
and that's
as
cool.
part of an ensemble he's in,
and he's good in that, and that's the sort of role I'm glad I like seeing him in again. But again, it's still not. I mean,
well, Con Air, High Fidelity is after Con Air. Because Con Air actually came out the same year as Grosse Pointe Blank.
Yes.
Weird,
But also Runaway Jury, I think, was a pretty big one.
That's
the inevitable.
The star-studded cast there probably filled out the budget.
America's Sweethearts as well was.
But my recollection, I haven't seen America's Sweethearts, I think, since the cinema. He's relatively smaller role in that he's the background to the story. Not the actual story itself.
Yeah, that's fair.
I must admit, if I could get someone to write, well, I know exactly who to ask. If we could get a movie made for him now, written, like, the thing I would like to see him do is, have you guys seen any of the films by John Carney? He's an Irish director who specializes in making films that are basically musicals without actually being musicals, because they're set in worlds with musicians, and so the music is part of the film. So
did he do Once?
Yes. He did Once, and then he did Begin Again with Keira Knightley and Mark Ruffalo, and then he did Sing Street, which is freaking amazing, which is the 80s set, coming of age. It's doing the John Hughes thing, but in Ireland, and it does it really well. Carney's got an incredibly light touch. He's really, really good, but he grounds things. Once, the key to Once is that the two people who are singing are both musicians before they're actors. But the thing is that the Eastern European character, the Eastern European actress, she is an immigrant, and so when she's playing this woman who wants to be a singer but is actually busy cleaning hotel rooms, that's literally. Like, she knows the experience. It's real. It's grounded in that sense. So the romance happens, and the same thing with the Knightley Ruffalo one. It's the Knightley Ruffalo thing is almost like hanging out in New York in a kind of vibrant club / music agent scene kind of thing, and it feels, for all the cliches, it feels real. And I feel that's where I'd like to see Cusack, in that kind of film again, because we were saying, one of the things about this era is the Hang movie, right? Like, I saw an article recently saying, the 70s was all about the Hang movie, and I was like, actually, no, I don't think it ever went away. I think Gen X gets its own set of Hang movies. Where we just hang with the characters, right? Like, that's literally what Reality Bites is, right? You just that's what Clerks is, which is now 30 years old this month, and it's like, actually,
I'd say maybe even more so than Clerks. I think that Grosse Pointe Blank and a film like Chasing Amy seem to have a lot of that similar vibe of, it's just people going about their day and the conversations they have, and then Grosse Pointe Blank mixes that in with some violence and gunplay periodically.
But it's also very, very carefully thought through and well created violence and gunplay. I mean, that's the other thing, is that the quality of it is actually really, really good. You mentioned John Wick earlier. This is 2 years ahead of The Matrix. This is one of those films where the decision to cast Benny the Jet Urquidez and get Cusack to train and do the whole thing for that one fight, even the comedic nature of how he holds two guns in the ultimate, but he knows what he's doing in the reloads. Everything is like on point, and you're kind of like, okay, somebody took this bit seriously. And he's ahead of the curve on that. He's doing that before Reeves is doing it, for anyone else is doing. He's right in there, and you sort of think, okay, this is different. This is somebody who wanted to balance. He wants a balance here. He's trying to create that balance between the comedy and the things that we should take seriously. And sometimes the action is comedic, and the relationships are the serious part. And then it flips around and flips over. And that tonal shifting is just so well handled. It's just so remarkable. So This was minute 41 of the Grosse Pointe Blank podcast, Debi Radio, 79.5 FM, featuring your co-hosts, co-writers, and co-producers, Dev Saligar and Hugh David.
Today's guest was John Strawn of the now retired Super-candid podcast, but you can still find most of those episodes if you look for them online. Where else can we find you, John?
You can find me quite active in the Star Wars Minute Discord server and the iFanboy podcast. That's what really got me into being a fan of podcasts, and I think there's a great community over there of fans and podcasters.
Both great places to check out for sure. You can find us on all good podcast players, as well as on YouTube, Twitter, aka X, and Spotify at Debi Radio, and on our website, debiradio.com. And for all of those, it is Debi spelt like in the movie, which is DEBI.
And finally, if you want to chat with us, come find us in the Facebook listeners group, which is once more Debi Radio, 79.5 FM fan club. That's once more DEBI Radio.
Sure was clear that all of this was new. Concentrating hard like a little girl, smoking for the first time. It wasn't done.